Welcome back to Benchmark. On today's Spotlight segment, we have the second installment of our exclusive interview with the former UN Under Secretary General for Disarmament Affairs and member of the Friday Forum here in Sri Lanka, Jayantha Dhanapala. So this is part 2 of our New Year interview with you, Mr. Dhanapala. Let's take off from where we left off. The government has often cited or touted some very impressive achievements. For instance, poverty levels are down from 15% to 9%, unemployment from 5.5% to 4.3%, and in the Human Development Index, we've gone up 10 positions, although we still remain at 91. What do these numbers actually mean to us?
Well, I don't have the information, not being an economist, to be able to evaluate those claims made by the government, except of course to confirm that the Human Development Report does show that the government has improved in terms of its Human Development Index. What is important about these figures, however, is that they should show equitable development, not just an increase of income for the average person in Sri Lanka, but a distribution so that we don't have a gap between the very rich and the very poor. We know that there are super rich people in Sri Lanka who can import Lamborghinis and Porsches and other very expensive cars, but we also know that there are people living well below the poverty line, and that is not an acceptable situation for a country which calls itself the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka. And so I would press the government to let us have figures that ensure that we are growing, but also that we are growing in an equitable manner, so that there is a across the board improvement in the living conditions of our people.
Moving on to government and governance, what are the pros and cons in this very crucial point, and what are your expectations?
I was reading last year an article in the New York Times which quoted a professor from a Chinese university talking about the fact that humane authority was one of the philosophies of governance in traditional China, and he was recommending that humane authority would be the most sustainable form of governance. And if you compare that with hegemonism or autocracy, certainly that is very true, because the way in which democratically elected governments exercise authority is very important. There must be a certain degree of governance which understands the feelings of the people. It is not authoritarianism as we are seeing increasingly today. We are not only geared to elections and the cycle of elections and the electability of governments, but we are actually looking to the dispensation of justice and fairness. A Right to Information Act, for example, would help us to understand better whether the government is in fact serving the needs of the people and of society that they have been elected to serve.
Do you think the opposition is playing the role it is supposed to play? For instance, would it be right in saying that by criticizing anything and everything that the government does, the opposition has lost its way and many Sri Lankans are merely paying lip service to what it says in and out of Parliament?
Well, first of all, I think the opposition has shown a lack of leadership, and we need to have the internal problems of the main opposition party remedied so that they can once again play the role that an opposition should play in any parliamentary democracy. Secondly, I think in all fairness to the opposition, the government is not allowing them to play that role. When you have your membership raided from time to time, and when your members are seduced to join government either with the promises of a ministerial office or some other lollipop, then you have an undermining of the role of the opposition, and an undermining, mind you, of the role of the electorate, because the people who voted for that man voted for him because of his party policies. And for him then to betray those votes and cross over to the government is in fact a fundamental betrayal of the people's democratic rights. And he has no business to continue in parliament if he switches sides. The opposition has got to do much more in terms of mobilizing opinion, in presenting themselves as an alternative government. And when they criticize the government, they must tell us what is the alternative policy that they would propose. What, for example, is the United National Party's policy with regard to the ethnic issue? We have not yet seen that. And we have known what they did when they were in power, but we have not seen an alternative to what the current situation is as a permanent political solution to the problem.
Time now for a commercial break. On the other side, we have more excerpts of our exclusive interview with Jayantha Dhanapala. Stay tuned. Thank you for staying with Benchmark. We now continue with more insights from former UN Under-Secretary General for Disarmament Affairs, Jayantha Dhanapala. How do you view the campaign by the opposition in November when it protested against the incarceration of General Sarath Fonseca? They made statements like, this is the Sri Lankan Spring, similar to the Arab Spring. Do we have the caliber or the makeup of people who actually, the kind of people power that we've seen in the Middle East?
Well, first of all, I think that occasion of the presentation of the budget by the President was an inappropriate occasion for a demonstration with regard to General Sarath Fonseca's verdict. I know it came just before the budget day, but they could have selected another moment. And I think in all fairness to the President and the fact that he was presenting a very important budget speech, they may have postponed their demonstration for another occasion. But to talk about the spring as a political spring, I gave a speech last December to the Transparency International Annual Awards Day when I tried to make a distinction between the Arab Spring in autocracies like in Tunisia and in Egypt and of course in Syria and so on, and what is happening in India. Because I think in a functioning democracy, the limitation of people's power is obvious. As long as you have avenues for protest and avenues for democratic expression of dissent, we have to continue to use that. And going into the streets and holding governments ransom to demands of the street, I think is dangerously close to anarchy. And we need to therefore look at things in proportion. Certainly the autocracy of Ben Ali, who had ruled Tunisia with an iron fist for over 20 years, had to be toppled, and the only way to topple it was by this popular movement. What happened in Tahrir Square is also justifiable because of the way in which President Mubarak ruled. But these are very different situations from the situation that we have in Sri Lanka. And although, of course, we may not agree with the government and the way in which it is ruling, there is an opportunity at the next election for us to effect a change, if we so wish. And so I think you need to maintain that in a democracy, as long as the institutions of democracy are functioning and are not dysfunctional, then we should continue to look for democratic ways of changing governments.
You paid a glowing tribute to LMD Sri Lankan of the Year 2011, Kumar Sangakkara, in the December edition of our magazine. For instance, you did say that he is fit to be a future leader of our country, although from a personal point of view, he did say that once he retires from cricket, he would be focusing on his family and his professional life as a lawyer. Seemingly nothing much to do with the national agenda. But what did you mean when you said he has the potential to be a future leader?
Well, I meant every word of the tribute I paid to Kumar Sangakkara in my piece written in the Lanka Monthly Digest last month in December. I think that he is more than a cricketer because I think his speech at the MCC demonstrated a depth of thinking and a breadth of vision that makes him a very good potential leader of the country. Now, irrespective of whether he takes to politics or not, the fact is that Sri Lanka needs leaders of that caliber who the people can look to as icons in our society. We have very, very few of them, and many of them are outside the political field. We can always respect a brilliant university don or a very able lawyer, a very able social worker for what they are and for what they contribute to society instead of their actually being in politics. And I see that kind of role for Kumar Sangakkara in the future, irrespective of whether he takes to law as a practice or whether he takes to cricket administration or whether he enters politics or not. Because he has that potential of being able to have the charisma and the leadership qualities to demonstrate to the people of Sri Lanka that we are a people and we can produce leaders who we can admire to and look up to. And I think he reestablishes, in a sense, therefore, a faith that we can have in ourselves as a society.
Will anything be done about corruption in this country? It seems to me, is it worthwhile pushing the buttons because it seems of no avail? Everyone seems to be saying something like, you have to live with it, you have to have it to get things done. What more can we do? Do we really have to live with it? What more can business do and what more can people do if we want to get away from it? It's a scourge.
Well, first of all, the people need to abandon this defeatist attitude to say that nothing can be done about it. It's all over the world, and therefore why should we bother if that is the price we have to pay for some development. That is the fundamental reason that leads to the apathy of the people to do something about it. We have to do something about it. The corruption index, based on a survey done of businessmen and analysts of various countries, show that Sri Lanka in 2011 was 3.3 in an index of 0 to 10, 10 being the supremely clean. Now, New Zealand, I think, was the topmost, and so are countries like Singapore and others. If they can reach that level of cleanliness in public life and being corruption free, so can we. We have a very high level of literacy in Sri Lanka, which we constantly pride ourselves in. We also have a high degree of voter participation in our elections, which we again are rightly proud of. So we can also ensure, as we have 4 religions who preach the highest moral values, that we can reach high levels of governance by ensuring that our rulers remain as free of the taint of corruption as possible. If countries like Singapore, an Asian neighbor, can do it, so can Sri Lanka. And I think we need to ourselves ensure that not only is the taking of a bribe a punishable offense, but the giving of a bribe is also a punishable offense. If you are stopped for a traffic offense, how many people try to get away by trying to pass a buck onto the policeman? The policeman is of course wrong in accepting a bribe, but I think the offending motorist is also wrong for trying to even offer it. The same is true for anything to be adopted. How many people who complete their houses in various local authorities try to get a certificate of compliance by paying a bribe? Of course they try to wash their hands of it like Pontius Pilate by getting the contractor to pay the bribe. But that is wrong. We have a responsibility. And if a country is corrupt, I would place the blame on the society itself for having allowed that degree of corruption to prevail.
Well, on Spotlight today, that was former UN Under Secretary General for Disarmament Affairs, Jayantha Dhanapala. And we take a short break now. On the other side is the Voice of Business.